The wind howled through the broken windows of the old farmhouse as Daniel parked his rusted pickup by the fence, its paint chipped and weary from years of labor. The sun had dipped low behind the distant hills, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. As he stepped out, gravel crunching beneath his boots, a feeling of strange familiarity swept over him, a pull he couldn't explain. But when he pushed open the creaky wooden door, what he saw froze him in place. Two women, one older, one barely in her 20s, stood by the fireplace that hadn't been used in decades. Their faces were pale, startled. One of them clutched a blanket around her shoulders, the other held a small lantern that flickered nervously in her shaking hand. Daniel's first thought wasn't anger or fear. It was confusion. Because this house, this long-forgotten piece of his new beginning, was supposed to be empty. If you believe that kindness, forgiveness, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps bring real, heart-touching stories like this to life. Daniel Hayes was a single father trying to rebuild after a storm, both the one that tore his home apart and the one that tore his family. His wife, Clara, had passed 3 years ago after a sudden illness, leaving behind their little boy, Noah, who was only 6 then. For years, Daniel lived in survival mode, working extra shifts, fixing trucks, saving every dollar just to buy a small piece of peace. When he found the listing for a century-old farmhouse miles outside town, everyone told him it wasn't worth it. But to him, that abandoned house was more than rotting wood and empty halls, it was a chance. A fresh start. A place where the ghosts of his pain could fade into the whisper of the fields. He had bought it cheaply, planning to fix it slowly while living with Noah in their rented apartment in town. He'd spent 2 weekends cleaning debris, patching leaks, and removing the dust of decades. It wasn't much, but it felt like healing. When he left a few weeks back, he locked the doors, intending to return once he had the supplies and time. But now, as he stood inside the same house, something had changed. The air smelled faintly of bread. The fireplace had been used. And the living room, the one that had been cold and lifeless, looked lived in. The two women didn't speak at first. They just stared at him, their eyes filled with the same fear one feels when the past suddenly walks in uninvited. It took Daniel a moment to notice the child sleeping on a makeshift bed of blankets near the wall. A little girl, maybe 3 or 4, curled up beside a small stuffed rabbit. His heart clenched at the sight. The older woman, her hair streaked with silver, face worn by exhaustion, finally spoke. She apologized, her voice trembling, explaining they had nowhere to go. They'd been living in the farmhouse for 2 weeks, hiding from a life that had given them nothing but heartbreak. The younger one, her daughter, had escaped an abusive relationship. The little girl was her child. They'd been sleeping in shelters before they found this house abandoned, half open, as if fate had left it for them to survive a little longer. Daniel should have been angry. After all, it was trespassing. But instead, he just stood there, silent, letting their words soak into the walls. He looked around at what they'd done, swept floors, patched curtains, even planted a few wildflowers outside. Somehow, they had breathed life into something he thought was beyond saving. Maybe because, like the house, they too had been left behind. That night, Daniel didn't kick them out. He simply said, "We'll talk in the morning," and walked to his truck to think. He sat for hours, watching the stars through his windshield. He remembered Noah's face when he first showed him pictures of the farmhouse. "It looks lonely, Daddy," Noah had said. "Can we make it happy again?" Maybe, Daniel thought, happiness wasn't something you built, it was something you shared. The next morning, he returned with a box of groceries and coffee. The women were awake, ready to leave, but he stopped them. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. "At least not until you've got a place to stay." They hesitated, uncertain. But as days turned to weeks, something extraordinary happened. The farmhouse, once a place of silence and sorrow, began to hum with life. The older woman, Ruth, cooked breakfast every morning, her laughter echoing through the halls. Her daughter, Emily, helped Daniel fix the roof and repaint the rooms. Little Rosie, the child, became Noah's new best friend. They would run through the fields chasing fireflies, their giggles carrying over the hills. It wasn't planned, but somehow, a broken man, 2 lost women, and 2 innocent children were mending something larger than any of them could see. Daniel found himself looking forward to weekends again. For the first time since Clara's passing, he didn't feel hollow when the sun went down. He began to understand that grief doesn't always end, it just changes shape. Sometimes, it comes back as warmth in someone else's kindness. But not everyone saw it that way. When word got out in town that he was letting strangers live on his property, people whispered. The realtor who sold him the house warned him that he could lose everything if they refused to leave. Even his sister called it reckless. "You're trying to fix the world, Dan," she said over the phone. "But you can't save everyone." He hung up, staring at the farmhouse through the window, where Emily was reading to Rosie by the fire. Maybe he couldn't save everyone, but maybe, just maybe, he could save one family. One evening, after a storm rolled through, the roof began to leak again. Daniel and Emily worked late, patching holes while rain drummed above them. When they finally stopped, soaked and exhausted, Daniel found himself looking at her, not as a stranger, but as someone who had quietly rebuilt his world, one nail, one meal, one smile at a time. She had her scars, just like him. But her eyes, gentle, steady, spoke of survival. She had learned to keep going even when life tore her apart. Weeks later, Ruth found work at a nearby diner, and Emily began taking online classes for nursing. They offered to leave once they got back on their feet. But Daniel hesitated. "This house," he said one night, "feels like it finally belongs to all of us." And they stayed, not as guests, not as intruders, but as something that looked a lot like family. Months passed. The fields around the farmhouse bloomed again. Noah and Rosie built a tree swing. Daniel repaired the barn and turned it into a small workshop. And on quiet evenings, when the crickets sang and the lanterns glowed in the windows, he often thought about how life can bring strangers together for reasons that only the heart can understand. The farmhouse that once stood abandoned had become a home, not because of the walls, but because of the people who dared to love inside them. Years later, when someone asked Daniel about the story of that old farmhouse, he would smile and say, "I bought an empty house, but it gave me a family." If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Every view, every comment, every share helps us spread stories that remind the world that love, compassion, and second chances still exist. Before we end, tell us in the comments, if you were Daniel, what would you have done that night when you found them inside? We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories of kindness below. Because sometimes, the home we build isn't made of wood or brick, it's made of the people who find their way to us when we least expect